so you can take a picture next to them.
I got the Riz in this.
They were saying, why are you letting Wade mug you? And I was like, get out of here, man.
You got to step up your game, huh?
Yeah, I got to step up my game. So I'm desperate. I'm just hustling for it. At this point. Let me make sure this thing is working, though. Oh yeah, it is. Oh
yeah, I believe we are live with our group here at YouTube Live. There is a 7-second delay, so when you're typing in the chat there, it's going to take us a bit of time, but we're getting your messages passed over for questions that come in, and then we did have some questions that came in before the show, so we can get started with our backlog of questions, but we'll also be watching. Any questions you have, please type those into the chat and we'll address them. That's what we're here for today. We're going to talk about retirement planning with the questions that came in already from a number of different perspectives, and we'll see what else we get throughout the show. So welcome, everyone.
Yeah, hey everyone. And Wade, you may want to do the intro of Retire with Style just in case. I'm not sure it caught from the very start.
Oh, okay. So this is the Retire with Style special live YouTube edition. If you are listening on a podcast app, that means you're hearing the recording of it. But if you are here with us live, May 13th, 2024, please ask your questions in the chat.
That's right.
On that note, with the questions that came in advance, we can get started as we wait for new questions to come in as well. Alex?
Sure. And I think my kids got a hold of this because I'm seeing bonjour from Ireland, from Matteo Murgia.
Oh,
and so I'm embarrassed to say, not only is he not from Ireland, he's got the language all confused.
Yeah, English in Ireland.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to start taking the helmet off of him when he's walking around the house. I think he may be compressing his skull and not giving the brain enough space to oxygenate properly. At least I'm thinking.
Is his school year finished, or is he playing hooky to watch his dad on YouTube?
No. I have Ander and Matteo and their good friend Finn. They have what's called a 2-week work study. They're done with other AP courses and the like. Not that Matteo's taking AP courses. That's overly ambitious for him. Someone of his ilk. No, I'm kidding. And so once they're done, there's nothing to do in the school system. Yeah, it's one of those things where they're just babysitting them. And so they can do a work experience. So we're gonna put him to work over the next 2 weeks. And remember, I was telling you I had that issue to deal with, so we didn't have time to kind of have an orientation. So I just said, just listen to this YouTube live, and we'll deal with it after.
Get on the job training.
Yeah, on the job training. From that standpoint. So anyone that you see any suspicious entries, sorry.
Positive reviews of Alex's performances.
Yes, but they're the ones that said you were mogging me. I think it was Ander who said it, which is, for those of you, is when your good-looking guy, Exhibit A, Wade, purposely gets next to somebody that's less aesthetically pleasing.
Isn't that there's also like a wingman or something?
No. Come on, man. But yeah, so apparently I've been accused of mogging. You've been accused of mogging me, so hence I needed to change up my look. I thought, let's see what the mustache does. So there it is, Tom Selleck.
Yeah, looking dapper.
Thank you. So we got our numbers are increasing, but before they decrease, let's actually handle some questions, right?
Okay. Yes. Question 1, and some of these questions are rather lengthy, so I thought we'd start with a shorter question just to get the ball rolling, so to speak. But question 1.
Before you get into that, though, so we have questions already. We on Retirement Researcher. This weekend, we asked folks to send in questions. So we have a handful of questions so we can kind of get the ball rolling. But ideally, you folks are here listening, so send in your questions. We'll get to them. If we don't get to them today, we'll have podcasts where we will get to them. I mean, last time we expanded the Q&A for, I don't know what it was, but over 5 episodes easily, right?
Yeah, more than that.
So type them in. We'll get to them all. In fact, we hope you do, because it gives us things to talk about in future episodes. But for right now, we have some preset ones. We'll start with those, and then we'll just play it by ear.
And yeah, as you ask questions, we'll incorporate those in. We won't just go through our whole list of pre-submitted questions. But question 1, Alex, Once I retire, how can I determine how much I can spend from my portfolio monthly and not run out of money over my expected life? Is the probability of success using a Monte Carlo simulation the best option?
Why don't I start with that a little bit and talk about the Monte Carlo part, and then you could jump into, I'm thinking funded ratio and stuff like that. Does that make sense, Wade?
Yeah.
Okay. With regards to Monte Carlo, I ultimately this has become the default tool for a lot of advisors when they do planning. A couple of things. Monte Carlo is not like a financial plan. A lot of folks will say, oh, here, we'll do a financial plan, and here's a Monte Carlo. That's a quick and dirty kind of thing, if you will. And what the Monte Carlo is doing is every portfolio, you have some expected return and some expected standard deviation around it. And standard deviation would be code for variability in any given year, what that return will be. So if the expected return is 10% a year and the standard deviation of that portfolio is 17% a year, what you're going to get is 67% of the time, the returns will be between a return of 27 or -7. That's within normal limits. And normal limits is the stats way of saying, hey, that's what you signed up for, if you will. You should expect that. All right. And so when you're running a Monte Carlo, what it's doing, it's just randomizing those returns under those parameters. Right. For the most part, let's just leave it at that. For the purposes of this, that's a fine enough statement. And so it's going to run, let's say, 200 runs, 500 runs, 1,000 runs. And that's what the portfolio will do. And within that, you gave it some target where I want to assume that I'm going to die at age 92 or something along those lines. And I want at least to die with at least $1 in my account. Anything below $1 is zero. Sometimes there's like bequest. And so in that standpoint, from that vantage point, maybe I want to leave at least 250,000 for the next generation. And so anything below 250,000 is the equivalent of a failure, right? And so you run 1,000 of these, I said 1,000 to say 1,000. And afterwards you get it back and it will say something like 80% chance of success. What that really means is out of those thousands of simulations that you run, out of 8,000 simulations that you ran, 800 of them were above the watermark that you set. Okay. And so that has become the quick and dirty within our industry to determine if you're on track to achieve your objectives. That's simple enough, but then it isn't, because there's some issues that I don't think Monte Carlo runs through the tape on. Now, some advisors like to get into it with, the curve of the stock market is leptokurtic, there's fat tails. No, they love to sort of say things like that to show off that they took stats beyond stats 101, kind of thing. And they get into, there's fat curves, and so this discounts everything and all that. I don't get into it like that. I think directionally, Monte Carlo is a good tool for getting an assessment of it. Whether I'm going to fight about the modal of the curve or the fat tails of the curve and things like that. Look, if I was running a quantitative hedge fund, that's a different story. But here we're doing a financial plan to see if you're on track, and knowing that it's going to change year to year, I think that's fine. But that's not my issue that I have with Monte Carlo from this standpoint. When you're doing Monte Carlo, there's two things that I think from a planning perspective make a lot of sense that you need to see. Number one is the magnitude of failure. And what I mean by that, and Wade actually started writing about this, so I'm going to talk about it like if I'm the one that thought of it. But the reality is let's say you want to see if you're on track to achieve your goals, right? So it's doing those simulations and it's seeing if by certain ages, even death, you have a certain amount, right? And if you don't, it's counted as a failure, right? So let's say out of the 80% success rate, let's say it was 60% success rate. And I'm going to kind of use these numbers. I don't know if they're bound to reality, but they help with the story. So 60% success rate, but the 40% that failed, half of them failed by less than $100. Is that really a failure? Probably not, right? The other piece is, with that is, you would make adjustments along the way if things were nosediving. So, just based on that, Monte Carlo is not this panacea. The other piece of it is the higher the success rate, the more likelihood that you're going to underspend in your retirement. And so if you really, and maybe Wade can expand upon that, but if you really think about that, what are you doing this all for, right? You're doing this all so you can enjoy your life. And if you spent your years accumulating only to then be scared about spending or not wanting to spend because you wanted to keep this magical number as a Monte Carlo score, I personally don't think that's the way to go. So that's how I would answer that. And the other piece, at the beginning, we should have said this. This isn't investment advice. Talk to an advisor. We're just giving you sort of a practical sense of how to look at things and how to begin to analyze it. Wade, did I get an A on that? A B, a C? What do you give me?
Yeah, Monte Carlo simulations. It's a way to build in randomness. So it's a common method used, and I don't have any particular fault with it. Like you, it's not necessarily my favorite go-to approach. And the concern is just really, it can be a black box about what the assumptions are. You need average returns for each asset class. You need volatilities for each asset class. Those may not really be reported, but the results are very sensitive. Like if you have slightly optimistic assumptions built into it, you could get a 95% success rate. But if you just say the average stock return is going to be 1% or 2% less per year, that could drop the success rate down to 70%. So it really is sensitive. And so the way that we've approached things at McLean Asset, well, more retirement research, I guess, in terms of we built the funded ratio tool, which just comes at it from a different direction. Because at the end of the day, if you use a Monte Carlo simulation and you target a success rate, say you want, like I want my plan to work with 90% success, behind the scenes, there's a fixed rate of return that links to that. That if you took away the randomness and just got this fixed rate of return every year, it would correspond to a 90% success rate. Now that fixed rate of return would be well below the average, because if you assumed a fixed average rate of return, you'd actually get a 50% success rate from the Monte Carlo simulation. So Monte Carlo, you're implicitly assuming some sort of low fixed rate of return that's equivalent to having a high probability of success. That also gets into Alex's point about potentially underspending in retirement, because you're spending at a level that's connected to a low rate of return and also a longer than average lifetime. But the trouble with Monte Carlo is you don't know what that rate of return is. That's why I'm having to be a bit vague. It's less than the average, but it's something you would have to reverse engineer from the Monte Carlo. So I've really come to prefer to just come at it from the other direction, which is let's figure out a fixed rate of return that we're comfortable assuming. It should not be the average, because again, the average would be connected to a 50% success rate, and we do generally want a higher success rate. But we have more control over thinking about whether we link it to the TIPS yields, so Treasury inflation protected securities, the real rate of return plus inflation, which these days has been in the ballpark of 2%. There's another question later that was asked in advance that gets into some of that. But then you can control, okay, this is the rate of return, and with this rate of return, will my plan work? Do I have sufficient assets to meet the various goals that I've included in the financial plan? And if it works, that means you have enough assets. Your funded ratio would be greater than 1 or greater than 100%. And in that regard, if your plan can work, if you have fundedness as you lower the rate of return, just in the other direction, that implies a higher probability of success. But in this case, you don't know what the success rate is. You'd have to reverse engineer that, so to speak. But it's just coming at the same problem, but from a different direction. Let's assume a conservative rate of return for the plan. Let's see if the plan works with that conservative rate of return. If we're comfortable that we can reasonably outperform that rate of return in retirement, and our plan works with that rate of return, then we should be okay. We should be in good shape. And so that's really how I like to approach things. And then specifically with the question, how can I determine how much I can spend on a monthly basis? Well, if you're trying to figure that out with either Monte Carlo or a funded ratio, that's where you can start playing around with, okay, right now I run the plan with this spending goal and I get a 95% success rate, or I have 130% funded status. That suggests I can raise the spending. And so I'll increase the spending until I get to the level I'm comfortable with, whether that's a 90% success rate, although as you were talking about, Alex, people are flexible, therefore you can really target a lower success rate, maybe an 80% success rate or a funded ratio of say 105 or 110% to build in some buffer there. But you can really increase your spending until you're getting to that threshold that you've deemed being reasonable. And then at that point, that's how you could approach determining what's the maximum I can spend that gives me a level of sustainability for the financial plan that I feel comfortable with.
Yeah, a couple of things while you were talking, I was thinking, and what we see at McLean, and again, Wade and I are principals of McLean Asset Management, retirement researcher, and RISA, and this is our side gig, right? This podcast. But what we see a lot is folks popping around different advisors and going with the advisor that gives them a higher Monte Carlo score. And there's a thinking that, oh, those investments are better because there's a higher Monte Carlo score. That's a load of BS kind of thing. This is where Wade said assumptions, garbage in, garbage out on the assumptions.
Right.
And you just got to be careful with that. I wouldn't give that any credence at all. Just keep that in mind. I personally prefer the funded ratio a lot more because it starts it from an angle that I just resonate with better, which is, okay, let's start conservatively. Can I make it? Assets divided by liabilities. And that's good enough, and then you can go from there. But what it does is it doesn't involve these fancy sort of return assumptions that are, that you need divine intervention sometimes for those things to work out accordingly. And plans, I got to give you, a financial plan is not written in stone. It's not, think about Randy McNally and those roadmaps that you used to have years ago to go to some trip versus Waze, right? You want to think of planning like Waze, where you're going to constantly course correct if things happen. And so the assumptions and all that kind of stuff and trying to be precise, it's just not worth the time. You're better off just going at it from a more fluid approach and assessing as you go. And for me, the funded ratio is a much better tool for that. And how much do you spend? You spend enough until you don't feel comfortable anymore with the outlook of the score. Right?
Until your scores are dropping below thresholds that you are concerned that this is not a good threshold to have for the plan. Then I should maybe cut my spending to get back on course.
What's a quick and dirty? I think once you drop below 80, 85% on the Monte Carlo, you want to see what's that about. If you're below 112, 115 on the funded ratio, I kind of start paying attention, a little bit more. You're more constrained, if you will. You're not in the danger zone, but there's definitely a constraint that you have.
Yeah, and then how much you can react to that constraint. If you have more flexibility to make a temporary spending cut, that can allow you to play more fast and loose with not making cuts until you are getting closer to certain thresholds, lower success rates, lower funded ratios. But if you don't have as much flexibility, then you really need to have built in a plan that may require a bit less spending, but that's keeping you higher above those thresholds to reduce any potential risk of having to make those cuts later.
Well, I think we answered that one.
And as we answered that, it looks like we had a few more questions come in.
All right. What do you want to do here, Wade? Do you want to give, how do you want to play this?
Well, I'm having trouble parsing the meaning of the first question, and it is an estate planning type question too, but let's just work through them in order since I haven't really had a chance to preview them too much. But
yeah.
This next question, when would an account's beneficiary designation, and then literally reading it, would not need to be the assets transferred to a grantor trust if creditor, ex-spouse, or probate protection is not a goal? And so I'm not 100% sure what the question's truly trying to get at, but an important point to just emphasize here is beneficiary designations are of primary importance. You can't overrule a beneficiary designation by writing a trust saying you want that asset to go to the trust. Your will does not override a beneficiary designation. So if you want the asset to go into a trust at death, you have to make sure the beneficiary designation leads it to that particular outcome. And then if you just have to be careful with state law if your beneficiary designations are, if spouses in some states have strong protections where you may not just be able to designate whoever you want to receive the particular asset. It may have to go to a surviving spouse. But beyond that, I can't parse a lot out of, I think there may be something with the grammar in that question that is confusing me.
That's okay. And there's a couple more that are follow-ups to what we just said that could be interesting. And yeah, with regards to the estate planning question, because of the states and things like that, I agree. I want to be absolutely crystal clear with what's being asked. So we're gonna punt on that.
Every state has different laws.
Yeah, exactly. So and just realize there's only so many. This is a better medium for more higher level kind of questions. But here's a couple of follow-ups that are interesting to me. Not that the other ones aren't, but this is to how we kicked off the presentation. So I see this one right away from Bill. With Monte Carlo analysis, the higher the withdrawal from the asset portfolio, the higher the failure rate. By lowering withdrawals, you create a frugal retirement, maybe less than optimal. Yeah, this was my point about the higher the higher the probability, the most likely you're going to underspend.
Yeah, the higher the success rate, then right,
yeah,
it means you're spending less. Less spending equals higher success rate. More spending equals lower success rate.
Now someone can, yeah. Now you could be lucky, and the markets go up for 5 years, 40%, and then you rerun the Monte Carlo, and all of a sudden, you didn't technically increase your spending, but proportionally, it's reduced. Yeah. So Jeff here, if the funded, just because this is a follow-up to the funded ratio, I'll let you start it off. If the funded ratio is, say, 115%, should we just move all of our invested assets in TIPS? And I wasn't too clear. And while you were saying it, I was reading, so maybe I didn't hear it. Did you discuss what the funded ratio score means, like assets over liabilities, present value, that kind of thing, and what 115 means?
I didn't go into much detail about that, but yeah, that's the point. You look at all the household assets, including account balances and the present value of income streams, such as your Social Security benefits. If you could assume you had some amount in the bank today that would generate those future Social Security benefits, what would that amount be? That's its present value. Collect all your assets, collect all your retirement liabilities, expenses, essential spending, discretionary spending, legacy goals, what you want to have set aside for contingencies. And that will generally be all present values of future things that happen somewhere in the future rather than being just today's expenses. And then if the assets exceed the liabilities, you're funded for retirement. If you're assuming a TIPS yield, Treasury Inflation Protected Securities, and your ratio is over 1, it means if you had all your assets invested in TIPS, you should be able to fund those goals. Now, Jeff's question coming in saying, so if the funded ratio is, say, 115%, should we now just move all our assets into TIPS? And that is, the answer generally is no, but also it's, in terms of the relationship between asset allocation and the funded ratio, it's not that you necessarily have to think about all TIPS, but purely speaking, you would want to be the less risky invested when your funded ratio is you're exactly funded, because then any sort of hiccup and you become underfunded. As your funded ratio increases, that surplus is what you can really be more comfortable investing more aggressively. And if you are someone who's a very high safety first outlook, then TIPS or different types of protected income streams, you might want that 100% part in those kinds of protected income streams. But then whatever that discretionary excess, the surplus, that 15% surplus, as that surplus gets bigger, that's how you can approach, well, that part, it doesn't matter if it loses value, so I may want to invest that part more aggressively and build a greater upside, the potential to have even more in the future. That's the basic logic of asset allocation is as your funded ratio increases above 100%, you have more capacity to take risk. And whether you take risk on just the surplus, which is probably not the common answer. More people may take risk, especially if they're more total returns, taking risk on a lot more of that of their assets. But at least you have all I need to do is beat the hurdle. My investments have to perform better than a tips ladder. And if I'm confident I can do that with my investments, then you can build your overall asset allocation that way.
What I would add, more of a folksy kind of answer to this 115% is, wait, who said, you already won the game? Who's the
William Bernstein?
Yeah, William Bernstein, great author. I mean, if you're like getting into this for the investment management purposes, any great person. He's written the same book 5 times, kind of thing, William Bernstein, but they're worth the read again and again and again and again, kind of. But he nails it when he says, "Listen, you've already won the game. What is the purpose of investing? To put in $1 so you can come out with 3 later? Yes, more money is better than less money, but ultimately that's not the end game. It's you're doing something with it. And with this, you've already won the game, and so risk becomes a preference, and that's very important. When risk is preferential, then you have a lot of flexibility on what you want to do. It's not just put it all in tips, but theoretically, that's what you're asking yourself. If I can somehow, put all of the present value of my future earnings in tips, that's fine. Practically, you can't do that because Social Security income is part of that assets equation, and you got to wait for the money to come in, right? So it's not practically a thing to consider, but what you're doing theoretically is you're telling yourself, look, I've already won the game. For what I want to accomplish and for how I want to live in retirement that will satisfy me, I don't need to take more risk. So then the question, you better have a very good reason why you should, is all. Risk is a preference. So I just want to state that.
Well, and then, just if you have that more safety first outlook, you may agree more with kind of the Zvi Bodhi. He's a professor at Boston University. His outlook is you have no business investing in the stock market until you've effectively are 100% funded with safe assets. And then that, like I was saying, and then the surplus could be invested in the stock market. But a lot of people don't take the safety first viewpoint to that extreme. So, and if you are total returns, you don't feel as much need to have safe assets to meet all those expenses. You are more comfortable having a diversified investment approach. So you've got some flexibility there. But yeah, strictly speaking, all right, first 100% is safe. Beyond that, you can do whatever you want with it.
Wait, just to tap on this vein, so we can. It's going to be hard to come back to these questions about funded ratio and stuff afterwards, since we started. Maureen is asking, are long-term care costs built into the funded ratio?
With what we do at Retirement Researcher, yes, we have your liabilities. You identify your retirement budget. So how much do I want to spend between essential and discretionary throughout retirement? You identify any legacy goals, and then you identify your contingencies. And the way I approach that is you decide what sort of long-term care is the biggest contingency. If I'm not going to feel comfortable retiring until I can fund, say, 5 years in a nursing home, just as an example, that would be a fairly conservative example, but you specifically say, okay, here's this contingency liability between ages 91 and 95. I want to be able to spend an extra $100,000 a year, inflation adjusted. And then that becomes the long-term care liability. And if you wouldn't want to retire until you have the ability to do something like that, to fund that sort of liability, then that does become part of the funded ratio, because those contingency liabilities are there. You need enough assets to fund those. And so if you ultimately then never have the long-term care event, what you've set aside for long-term care just ends up funneling into the legacy at the end. But yes, someone could create a funded ratio and ignore long-term care, but we prefer to address long-term care by specifically assuming some sort of long-term care event built into the plan, built into the expenses you need to fund to be 100% funded for retirement.
And my question is, my only comment from that one is, I don't know if you're asking like, I don't think I'm going to need long-term care, so I don't want to build it in, or can the funded ratio accommodate the math needed to to account for long-term care? The question to the second answer is yes, it can, and it's just a matter of putting a line item in.
That's what I was just describing.
The answer to the first one is we just did a whole arc on long-term care on this podcast, and one of the main takeaways is, look, insurance is for low probability events that are high cost, right? You want to protect yourself from that. But long-term care is a double whammy. It's a high probability, high cost event. So you definitely want to fold that into your plan. If you're not, it's like not putting in food or something like that. You're going to get hungry. You're going to need care. I guess I just thought about that, but I guess you could have a heart attack walking down the street and you're done. But for the most part, you want to plan for long-term care. Wade? Yeah. All right. Let me see. I think this has to do with.
Yeah, Susan has a couple questions that may still be on the same theme before we start a new theme.
Okay,
so lots of questions coming in. We're going to have to make sure we go back and cover everything. But
we can put our kids to work. Ander and Mateo can organize this, put it on a nice Excel sheet for us, and all of that stuff.
Oh, wow.
Actually, we got somebody else too. Their buddy Finn McBride, who was, by the way, poet laureate for Alexandria City as a elementary school kid.
Oh, I thought you were just naming Matteo Finn since he said he was from Ireland.
No. Well, there's Matteo Murguia, obviously, and there's a Finn floating around there.
I thought I was being rechristened as Finn.
No. So here I got, what does Susan ask? Okay, are you giving thought to how the uncertain future, due to political instabilities, political, environmental, can be modeled? That's either Susan or that's one of my buddies that they love to bring up politics in the mix here. Why don't you answer that, Wade?
Yeah, and so then sometimes with the more sophisticated planning software, you can do scenario analysis where you have your baseline plan, but then you can specifically say, well, what if these other things happen? And that could be a big long-term care event as an example. Or on the political side, what if Social Security gets cut? Let's model that. Let's see how the plan does, assuming a Social Security benefit cut. Or what if tax rates go up to a certain level? Let's build the plan again and see how it would perform with a higher tax environment, that sort of thing. On the environmental side, I don't think planning software can address that too well. And the only way you can really address that is just by factoring in contingency expenses. For some environmental reason, I'll need to move and it's going to be costly. And so I just want to build in an additional expenditure to manage any sort of environmental impact. Beyond that, though, it's really, you're assuming a conservative rate of return. You're hoping these sorts of catastrophic things don't happen that may then ultimately mean your return assumption was not conservative enough. But that's how you generally approach it. And then if you have the ability to do the scenario testing, that's how you can look at some other factors as well. And other kind of variables that get looked at in scenario analysis for couples, what if one person passes away much sooner than anticipated, which may make the retirement less expensive in some ways due to the less expenditures for that individual. But there can be other implications as well, such as now the survivor is in the single payer tax bracket, Social Security is cut, the pension is gone, that sort of thing. So that would be another type of scenario to look at as well.
Okay. The other thing about this question that I want to make sure I address is that you can always account for scenario analysis, but I want to, because success is being a disciplined investor at the end of the day. And when you're doing your analysis, all the studies that you've written up on sustainable withdrawal rates and all of that stuff, how many times did you think about, hey, but I didn't account the Vietnam War during this time period. I didn't account for Nixon's resignation during this time period. I didn't account for JFK's assassination. I didn't account for the inflation during the late 70s to early 80s. I didn't account for from 1968 to 1978, the stock market didn't return anything, or the gold thing. I didn't account for Black Monday. I didn't account for the savings and loans crisis. I didn't account for no. I'm being dead serious though. I didn't account for the stock market bubble collapse. I didn't account for Enron and WorldCom and malfeasance in the corporate world. I didn't account for et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's always a moment. There's always time to give investors pause, and like the political thing coming up, especially during an election year. Look, this is why when you have an expected return, you have an accompanying standard deviation. Results will vary, but the moment you start really adjusting your plan because Biden's going to get elected or Trump's going to get elected or not, depending on your proclivity, I think that's problematic. You start getting in your own way of what's going to happen because of how the markets work and how that is already incorporated in current prices. So scenario analysis is fine, but I don't think these kind of political instabilities and this and that are something that I would hold yourself up on, because we could have done due to political instabilities. You could have written that in any month over the last 20 years. Remember, there's a recency effect of how you invest, where you take what's happening right now and you extrapolate that into the future. And it's, this time it's different, but it really is, right? You have to be very, very careful about that. And you almost have to disabuse yourself from thinking about those things when you're doing your plan, because it doesn't hit the way you're going to hit. You think it's going to hit. That's my sort of PSA announcement.
Yeah, and implicitly, Monte Carlo's analysis should account for you sometimes you get a few negative years returns and that sort of thing. So it's sort of built in. And if you assume a low enough rate of return with the funded ratio, it's the same sort of idea. This is a hurdle that I should be able to outperform regardless of the various news events that are always happening, randomness that's being introduced. And so, when I was giving examples of political instabilities, right, I wasn't referencing political things. It was really just more of, where does politics impact your retirement? If taxes increase, if Social Security is cut, things that are part of the public policy legislative process, not just simply who's going to win the next election, although there could be some relationship to then policy implications, but it goes beyond just the actual politics to public policy.
Yeah, and so I think that ends the whole Monte Carlo funded ratio and the ins and outs of that. Something I would say is in August on Retirement Researcher, what we do we do it a few times a year. The next one we have scheduled is in August. And so we're going to be doing a retirement income challenge where we invite, it's an open invitation, and it's, if you're in, you're in. And we spend 4 days helping you create a plan. We start with the RISA. Then we move on to the funded ratio. We talk about the interpretations of those, etc. And that's coming up in August. And I would say, go to retirementresearcher.com/challenge. And that way you'll get notified the next time it's in. I don't think we have a specific date other than just generally August.
In my calendar, I guess subject to change, but the week of August 26th, I have
there you go
for the retirement income challenge.
So that could be something if you're wondering, hey, what's this retirement income thing about from the plan? I'm just saying it because it was brought up, quite a bit here. So wait, I think that exhausts our questions for Monte Carlo. One question took us 41 minutes. Oh my.
Okay, well, let's pivot to. It seems like another theme coming in through the live questions is related to long-term care type of things.
All right,
I can try to go in order a little bit on some of these long-term care questions next.
Okay, and if I'm looking away, it's because I'm looking at a screen that has questions as they're coming in. We're not looking at YouTube live because there's a 7-second delay and it'll drive us crazy. But Brianna, Amber, Elizabeth, they're helping organize questions and shooting them into our Teams channel.
Jim Cramer.
Who's watching Kramer?
I thought you were when you were looking away.
No, I'm watching Power Lunch. That Josh Brown is my hero. Oh my! We can do a whole podcast on that kind of BS, but that's another world. All right, we have here Bill. How about discussing ways to handle long-term care? He's 65 now. When health conditions, in parents, chronic illnesses, prevent us from qualifying for long-term care insurance. Does episode 115 cover this topic? I don't know the episodes by number, but Wade?
Well, let's talk about it now. I think we did some of those long-term care episodes did discuss this, although maybe not so explicitly. But yes, traditional long-term care insurance is the hardest to qualify for. And if you've developed chronic conditions, you're probably going to struggle to qualify for traditional long-term care insurance. So what other options do you have? Some of the new hybrid policies are easier. So a hybrid life insurance with long-term care or annuity with long-term care, they have underwriting, but it may be easier to qualify than with traditional insurance. That might be something to look at. Or just simply, if you're looking for more of a protection-based approach, an idea we talked about that's not perfect, but it's use a deferred income annuity that's going to start income later in life, because that will approximate the time you may need more funds for long-term care. So whether it's the qualified longevity annuity contract inside of your IRA that you can put in up to, it's this year, I think with Secure Act 2.0, they changed it. It's now increasing for inflation. So I think $205,000 this year as a premium. And then you can have income begin at age 80 to 85, just trying to approximate, that's when I may need some more spending power to cover long-term care. That can be an option. That's kind of getting through all the potential safe ways to fund long-term care. So beyond that, it's just a general matter of self-funding. And there were some other questions asking about how to invest for self-funding. So we may come back, put a pin in that for a moment. And then, of course, the Medicaid possibility as well, that if you do get into a situation where you've spent down your other resources, at some point you may be able to qualify for Medicaid, not Medicare. And we stress that a lot in the ARC on long-term care, but Medicaid, once you've depleted other resources, which how that's defined varies state to state. But
yeah, and that could be I've got good news and bad news kind of realization.
So there's more on long-term care that have been coming in live.
Okay,
here.
let me scroll down then.
While we're on this theme. Let's see. Oh yeah. Oh, we did talk about long-term care.
We have one from Mike. Did we address the Mike one? Is having enough guaranteed income to cover all expenses minus long-term care costs, is that being overly conservative?
To cover like all.
I'm just reading the question straight up.
Longevity plus lifestyle, your entire retirement budget covered with guaranteed income, except unpredictable long-term care.
It's not a long-term care question. I just saw long-term care in there, so I just kind of my eyes went to it.
We can finish that one while we're on it. The safety first approach. Well, if you view all your expenses as really being essential and not flexible and not discretionary, you could approach it from the direction of having everything covered with guaranteed income sources. But that is a rather conservative approach. The safety first approach generally tries to break the retirement budget into essential expenses and discretionary expenses, and then looks to have reliable income sources to fund the essential expenses, and allows for a more diversified investment approach to cover discretionary expenses where you've got flexibility to make cuts. If you don't have any flexibility to make any cuts, and you have that safety first commitment orientation, then you may be looking to potentially use guaranteed income for all expenses. But I think that would not be such a common approach to take.
Okay. And wait, all of these that I answered, just as an FYI, I'm giving them a thumbs up on the Teams channel.
Okay.
As a shortcut that we've addressed it.
Okay. Yeah, there is another one here on this theme.
From Jeff, I think, right?
So dementia care, are elders put on streets to be homeless or put in subpar care units if they run out of money and have no family to care for them? Well, that's where Medicaid kicks in. Now, Medicaid, the quality of care through Medicaid, it's not, if you can self-pay and you can pay a higher amount, you may get higher quality care, but Medicaid still does a reasonable job. So this may be a little bit pessimistic in its outlook on what happens to individuals who cannot self-pay. However, with the demographic situation in the United States, more and more people over age 65 relative to younger ages, we do face constraints that there's just simply not going to be enough people to work in long-term care facilities to provide that sort of care. There's estimates that by 2050, the number of Alzheimer's patients may triple in the United States. And if we just simply don't have enough people to care for them all, and we haven't otherwise invented other technologies, which that's a whole nother angle. Maybe robots will take care of everyone at some point. But
Wow, wait.
Barring that, though,
HAL 2000.
Yes, everything else being the same, you may prefer to be able to pay for your care, either self-pay or through insurance, relative to having to rely on Medicaid. Hopefully we never get to a point where Medicaid is really subpar in terms of what it can support. But there's a potential risk for that.
Wait, there was we talked about it in the podcast. Maybe you want to talk about it. Like, is it better to be in a care facility while you're on Medicare before it flips to, before you have, while you have money, and then, eventually you may need Medicaid?
Yes, that may be helpful to get it, even if having a small insurance policy, the care coordinator benefit that's common with those policies may help you get situated in a facility. They may know about the rules of that facility better. What happens when you can no longer self-pay? Do you get pushed to a different part of the facility that may not be as glamorous, that sort of thing? But yes, if you can enter the facility before claiming Medicaid, in many cases, that may lead to a better experience than if you already have to apply to Medicaid before entering the facility. And again, Medicaid, the rules vary by state. Some states allow for more allowances, especially if there's a spouse. Other states, you really do have to be destitute before qualifying for Medicaid. So the rules vary by state, but Medicaid is the resource that once you're deemed to no longer be able to afford to pay for your care, Medicaid will step in and pay for long-term care once you qualify through the needing help with at least 2 activities of daily living and so forth.
I'll say this, and I think this is my own personal situation, and the caveat is anecdote is not evidence, right? I hate the fact that Bob is the one that first said that, by the way, and it stuck with me. I wish it wasn't Bob. Yeah, but I said, damn it, he's got me, man. But no, it's very true. It's an awesome phrase. Anecdote is not evidence, so understand that, right? But for my own situation, my dad is not gone.
It is evidence, actually. That's
but okay, it's a sample of one. All right. Shut up. Yes, thank you, Wade. Thank you, Wade.
There you go. You have an out on that.
Yeah, but it doesn't meet the parameters of the central limits theorem, so I can't use it in a stats, whatever. All right. Maybe if I had 28 samples, I could make that claim. But going back to this, look, my dad is on Medicaid. He's in a facility in Miami, and it's a great one. It's actually, they treat him. He's like 96. My dad's on the older side. He's like 96. Men don't usually live that long, especially from his generation. So he's like the mascot over there. But they treat him great, and he's Medicaid. So it just depends on how you look for it. Now, is he in dementia care? Yeah, he's effectively in a perpetual slipstream at this point. My mom, she's going to transition into Medicaid very soon, but she was able to get into an assisted living facility in Miami, and I'm very fortunate. They treat her like family there. They love her like a family member, and it's a matter of just doing a little bit of due diligence and making sure that you know the folks that are there. But where there's a will, there's a way around that stuff. Now, unfortunately, it takes work. It's not a matter of just picking up a phone and calling the local services. It's who do you know that knows who, like anything in life. but there is you dig deep enough and you could find a solution. Now the caveat there is that's Miami. That's a city with 5 million, Greater Miami, 5-6 million people. So it's different if you're in a town of 10,000, right? So I don't know. With regards to is everything all is lost? I don't think so. I think you'd be surprised on the upside what's available.
Very good. Yeah. And then actually, Jeff pointed out when I was trying to come up with the list of long-term care funding mechanisms a few moments ago, I missed mentioning the reverse mortgage. So what about a reverse mortgage in place to address long-term care needs? Absolutely. Now, it does need a caveat. Once you leave your home, you're no longer eligible to borrow from the reverse mortgage. So you can't necessarily use it to pay for institutional living. But people want to age in place. They want to age in their homes. And a reverse mortgage can be a great way to pay for in-home care. There was just in the newspaper this weekend, and I can't remember, I read the Dallas Morning News and the New York Times. One of the two was talking about a survey that, again, emphasizes this point.
Wait, you read the New York Times?
And the Dallas Morning News.
All right. Later, everybody. I don't care.
It was talking about how just this point that it's already well established, but another survey, another data point. People want to age in their homes. They don't want to move to institutions. This article was more about aging in place, to build in the ability to have a wheelchair accessible entrance or have a bathing facility on the first floor. But the same concept then also applies to long-term care, paying for in-home care. People don't want to move to institutions. And so if you treat your home equity as a funding source to help support staying in your home and supporting in-home care in your home, long-term care in your home, absolutely, that's another great potential approach. Not even, we're talking about when you can't qualify for traditional insurance, but you may also look at this as an alternative to traditional insurance as well.
Yeah, you've said it, man. Look, a big picture, you have to think of assets are fungible. Assets are fungible. Long-term care, comes at a cost. If you can use the equity that you have in place and turn that into liquid money, why not? Right? Assets are fungible, and you should take that sort of agnostic view on things.
Okay.
All right, Wade, we got about 5 minutes left on the hour. We're going to answer all the questions that are here and the ones of the write-ins. It's just, this is kind of like a more natural rhythm right now. And so we probably got time for one more.
I think we booked 2 hours for this, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking podcast. Oh, then we're good.
We're in such a hurry.
Yeah. Then we're good. Okay.
For anyone who is listening in, and this is going to get longer than you can handle, I guess on YouTube, you can watch the whole recording later, but we will also distribute this as podcast episodes in the coming weeks as well. So you'll have a chance to catch the whole conversation if you do need to leave at any point.
Okay. So I've got one from Bill that's kind of, are we done with
Yeah, I think we've covered the long-term care related ones, at least the live questions.
Let me see if there's any quick ones. Let me look at the Excel sheet where we have those. Give me a second. Income bridge, glide path. No, the closest thing would be the HSA question.
Yeah, that's not a long-term care one.
No, it's not. It just has the word health.
There was a question about how to invest your long-term care assets.
Oh yeah, like okay, you're right. It was.
Where was that on the list?
I think it was in the Excel. I think it was the last one in the Excel. While you're looking for it, the row 16.
Yeah, I'll read that question.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we're on the long-term care theme. So in a recent episode of the podcast, you mentioned setting aside if you're self-funding long-term care instead of buying an insurance product. For example, Wade shared his family's amount of $500K.
You sure it wasn't 5 million?
That would be tough. How would you recommend someone invest that portion of their money during retirement? I realize everyone's situation is different, but do you have any general guidelines or rules of thumb? Thank you. Okay. So This is fundamentally a tough question, and it gets partly into, so on the one hand, there are those individuals who have the more technical liquidity mindset, which is you just have a big pot of assets that you'll draw from as needed for different expenses. And you're really thinking about, well, what's the asset allocation for my overall pot of assets? If you're taking that approach, you're not really thinking about this question in the same manner, because you're not going to carve something out to be your long-term care reserve assets. You're just going to have this big pot of assets that you draw from. Now, if you have more of a true liquidity mindset, that is where you start to earmark, okay, this asset is for this purpose, I need to invest it. That other asset is for that other purpose. And so then you are thinking about the present value of my future long-term care. If 500K may be more like the future value, but the present value, hopefully you don't need, well, depending on your age, but you may not need that much set aside at the start of retirement. That being said, suppose it is $300,000 to $500,000 that you've said, okay, this is my reserve asset earmarked for long-term care. How do I invest it? It's a hard question to answer because you fundamentally don't know when you're going to need to tap into that. You could have an accident and need the money tomorrow. It may be 30 years before you need it. You may never need it. And so I think that does make it harder to follow the sort of idea that, well, I might need this money tomorrow, so I have to invest it conservatively. That's a lot of money to have on the sidelines for potentially the next 30 years. And to the extent that it is more likely you do have a long runway before these funds are needed, I don't think you necessarily want to invest it overly conservatively. You may have your general, some sort of cash bucket that may not just be for the long-term care, but in general, I want the next year of expenses in cash, something like that. Then you can say, well, if I do have the long-term care event, I've got that cash ready. But the rest of my long-term care reserve assets, I do want to hold in a more diversified investment approach. Just because the reality is it may be a long time before you need to tap into that. And if you hold it in cash throughout the entire retirement, you're potentially sacrificing a lot of return on that asset. So I guess it's not a rule of thumb or anything, but I would lean away from investing it too conservatively if it doesn't seem like you're necessarily going to need to tap into those funds soon.
Yeah.
You agree?
Yes. No, I mean, look, there's a lot of variables. I think the first one is what you said. Where do you stand on liquidity? True liquidity versus technical liquidity. You know, do you want it earmarked or do you want it inside of a big pot where other things you can draw from? You know, that kind of thing. There's no right or wrong answer. It's where your preference is for that. And then from there is, you know, what the allocation should be somewhat of a Goldilocks allocation, not too aggressive, not too conservative when it comes for that aspect of the money. It's going to be probably a lot more difficult if you use an aggregate allocation approach, you know, to determine, okay, where is the sliver coming from for long-term care eventually. And so to keep yourself honest from a behavioral standpoint, you probably want to have, you can look at the household allocation, but you want to probably have it into some sort of separate account, if anything, just for behaviorally being able to see that and to give you solace in terms of if anything happens, this is where it will come from. That's the only other caveat I think I could add, Wade, other than your answer, which there's only so many ways you can say what you said, right?
Mm-hmm. All right.
All right. All righty.
Okay, back to the live questions here.
Oh, we got some more? Okay, hang on.
But there's a couple. These are maybe a little bit miscellaneous ones. Let me see if there's any.
Okay, I can do the one about the fee-only planner, because that's kind of an odd one.
Uh-huh.
While you looking for other ones? Alex, excuse my ignorance. Are you a fee-only planner? I suspect you mean McLean. We used to be in NAPFA. We used to be the which is the fee-only association up until, 3 years ago, Wade? Something like that. The reality is we moved away from it simply because if you look at our writings, look, we do believe contractual income has a role in the portfolio. We've always actually believed that. And we would refer out a lot of that a lot of that business, frankly. And we would tell a client to come in, and the financial plan required some sort of annuity because that's what that person wanted, and we would refer it out. From a logistical standpoint, it becomes dicey because they're making it, the person would make a new relationship with somebody else, and we didn't know how they would be treated for that transaction and the like. And so we just ended up doing that in-house. From a workflow standpoint, it was just much easier, and you add to that everything that we've written on about contractual income and how there is a role for certain folks, and how we talked about the RISA, which is effectively what we find is 2/3 of the population wants some role of contractual income. We were being stupid, frankly, internally ourselves, not to consider that as part of the purview of our services. And so within that, we let go of our fee-only piece. Now, the underlying question to all of that could be, I don't know how you're asking it, but just for folks listening in, is, okay, your advice is conflicted. Look, everyone has conflicts of interest with regards to compensation. I think the key is transparency and allowing that transparency to take hold. I mean, Michael Finke just did a study on fee-only advisors and how they actually, more often than not, mistakenly, I think, ask people to claim Social Security early. That's financial planning wise. That's not a great outcome. Why? Because, well, that leads to greater investable assets. Greater investable assets, you can charge on those, right? From an AUM standpoint. And so I'm not a big fan of folks that wave this banner of moral superiority based on, this is this model, and this model is significantly better than that model. I don't think so. I think actually we hang our hat on transparency, and we hang our hat on the preference of how that individual wants to source retirement income based on the RISA. And we go from there, frankly, in terms of how our recommendations are. And so whether you're asking it this way or not, the answer is we let go of that because that doesn't allow us to actually really put the client first in terms of what their best interests are of how they want to source retirement income. I don't believe that one compensation model is better than the other when it comes to things like that, simply because even if you take the annuity, right? Okay, there is a higher upfront cost for the client, right? But that will probably, if you compare that on apples to apples to an AUM-based model, after 6-7 years, it's a break even. From that standpoint, because the AUM, you're probably paying 1% a year, right, in perpetuity, for that particular issue. And so, frankly, our clients are with us. The good news is we have clients for a long time. When we don't, it's because there's a death or there's a divorce or some sort of event that wasn't necessarily a nice thing. And so what I'm getting at is it's more than 7 years. It's usually 15, 20, 25 years that we have clients. And so even from that alone, you can make the case which is better, right? But I'm not even coming at it from that. I'm really coming at it from that. If you function from the standpoint of what's in the client's best interest based on how they want to source retirement income, and you're transparent about how you came up with that, I'm fine with that. Wade, just because Wade gets hit a lot with this, and maybe I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but there was something on the podcast or somewhere, right, Wade, where you were questioned like, well, it's obvious. Oh, that article that was written, right? It's obvious that Wade is going to recommend this. Yeah, because you're a shill for insurance companies, Yeah, I mean, those are kind of dilettantes that talk about what's going on without really knowing what the hell they're talking about. But Wade, you want to chime in?
So fee-only planners, that's kind of an approximation for investment management and financial planning. Alex mentioned AUM, that's assets under management, charging a percentage of assets to manage the investments. And or there can also be like retainer-based or hourly planning fees, that sort of thing. Historically, annuities paid a commission rather than having a fee set, having you pay the fee to the advisor directly. The commission paid the advisor. So that could create conflicts. With retirement, though, it is difficult to ignore annuities. And there are fee-only annuities. A lot of great opportunities in the fee-only annuity space. But because that area is small, there may be 40 probably more than 40, but whatever.
TPL had like 44, right? So.
There's many more commission-based annuity options out there than there are fee-only. And so even though fee-only should be cheaper because they don't have to extract the commission from the annuity, given the higher competition on the commission side, you can find better opportunities there. So just being able to best serve clients, as Alex was explaining, McLean Asset Management shifted away from that NAPFA fee-only, kind of arguing fee-only is the best model because there's no conflicts, to really trying to be as comprehensive as possible. And that may mean accepting a commission on an annuity sale, but being clear in how that's being transparently done. So fee-based would be the term for what we're talking about here, rather than the term fee-only.
All right, and there's a follow-up here. How do you determine if you have enough assets to make it worth engaging a fee-only planner? Right. Ideally, what you'll see is, I think, there's a reason Ken Fisher in his commercials sort of hate annuities, but then the caveat is only call us if you have more than 500 grand to invest.
Well, the other caveat is he's willing to pay your surrender charges on annuities, and he's not a charity. So what does that tell you?
Yeah, exactly. And add to that, if you have below 500,000, vaya con Dios. What do? Let them eat cake, kind of thing. And that's why annuities can actually be a good solution, because it automates the retirement income. But what I would say to this is, look, an advisor, to run an advisory firm, it costs money, right? And from that vantage point, probably anything below 500,000, which would equate to a 5,000 a year sort of asset management fee, is starting to get dicey for that person. You'll see many established advisors won't go below $1 million, and they're looking at a retainer or AUM of about 2,000. Because sometimes people will say, well, I don't want AUM, I want to pay a retainer. They're just going to back into a retainer. The advisor is going to back into some sort of retainer cost. That's more or less like what the AUM is. So it's kind of a look at the birdie kind of vibe. But when you think it's cost effective, you're probably looking at anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 as a minimum. Anyone that charges you less than $5,000 as an advisor is probably starting their firm, and there's nothing wrong with that. You got to start somewhere. I get it, but there's also as a client, there's also that phrase: no one wants to be your first client, and no one wants to be your biggest client. And so there's that yin and yang. But you see that if you're looking at an hourly planner, that's usually more for planning. They may look at your assets and say, I'll charge you just for this amount of time, but those folks in my world are secretly just waiting to turn to AUM advisors. They're just like biding their time. And there it is.
Okay. Well, we've got some other questions, but a brand new one that just came in is maybe while we're on the insurance themes briefly. So what are your thoughts on buying whole life insurance for teenage children? You want me to take that one?
Yeah.
So I did get a whole life policy for myself, and it was explained to me why I should also get them on my children. I did not bite on that. Of course, everyone's situation is different, but the basic logic in favor of getting a permanent life insurance for teenage children is to protect their insurability. If something happens to them and they're no longer insurable, they develop some sort of condition or have an accident, something you want to have so that when they're adults, they have the ability to get life insurance. I kind of figured that was somewhat of a low risk. And so ultimately, I was not personally persuaded to buy permanent life or any life insurance on my children. But that being said, if it is something you're concerned about, maybe an option there is just a small policy that has that guaranteed ability to increase it at higher ages.
Okay. Are there any challenges that you see this a lot on TikTok and all that kind of silliness about whole life insurance that it's kind of sold as this panacea to something that it's not really meant to be?
Yeah, so the research I've done is about using whole life insurance in retirement, and it's completely different. You're talking about you actually wrote it here. There's like infinite banking or invest like the Rockefellers. There's all these different things that are out there. I've never really gone too deep into any of that sort of thing. So that's not a retirement question. That's more how to manage your finances pre-retirement. So,
and for the most part, we think that that's like a bunch of silliness, to be honest with you. You're just lending money to yourself and then charging yourself interest, kind of thing. We don't get into that. All right. What else in terms of?
So here's a question you can handle. Okay. I'm about 1.5 years out from retirement. What strategy is recommended to lower risk during this time?
Okay, hang on. Where, just to make sure I see the it's from the Excel? Say it again?
The question came from Dan at 12, or I guess 1:33 p.m.
Oh, it was live.
Yeah, one of the live questions.
Okay.
Yeah, there's still some live questions we haven't covered yet.
Oh, Dan. Oh, I see. I'm about 1.5 years from retirement. What strategy is recommended to lower risk during this time? Well, a couple things on risk during this time, right? 5 years before retirement and 5 years into your retirement, you're in the fragile decade, right? And what that means is you can't control what economic cycle you're effectively retiring into. That's the one thing that's out of our control. Well, there's a lot of things out of our control, but that's one of the things that's out of our control. And so this is when you start really giving a sense to, what's going on? Because not only are you entering that cycle where your human capital is transferring to investment capital, your investment amount is probably the highest it's ever been. And so from the standpoint of stocks for the long term, that's fine and dandy, but you've already gone into that long-term phase. And you don't know what's going to happen in the next few years. And so you may be taking undue risk with the highest investable assets that you've ever had as you're entering an economic cycle that is random, right? And so that's risky. Hence, there's the fragile decade, right? 5 years before, 5 years into. Now, I don't know. I forgot what the actual number is, but it has a the returns during that time period will have a disproportionate effect on your overall success of your retirement plan. In the high 70s, Wade, or something like that? In the high 70s? The R square on the fragile decade and...
Oh, yeah, okay. Uh-huh.
Something like that, right?
Something like that, yeah.
And so there's a flip side. Someone can say, yeah, but it could be up too, right? You can't control that kind of stuff, and I don't want to leave like your retirement to a flip of the coin.
But
so
it goes both ways.
It goes both ways, but
volatility of outcomes both directions.
But you don't want to live 35 years just to have heads instead of tails at the end of that, right? So there's that piece, and really, I would start it off with the retirement income style awareness, which is what you're preparing yourself for, right? You're preparing yourself for retirement. So the first step in retirement, I wholeheartedly believe, I'm going to go out on a limb, Wade wholeheartedly believes this, is take the RISA. It's the first chapter of his book, where he writes about the study that we did on the RISA and how it took off. So you first have to identify how you want to source retirement income. And that's, are you a total return investor? Are you a risk wrap investor? Are you an income protection investor? Are you a time segmentation investor? I'm going to spare anyone going through, the definitions of each. Maybe, Wade, you can do it quickly when I pass it to you. But effectively, you want to know where you stand and how you want to source retirement income. Once you've determined that, you have to pick your strategy before you pick an allocation, whatever. Once you determine that, then you can start moving deck chairs around, right? And, okay, let's just say you end up being total return. Well, you want to ask yourself, what's the allocation that will give me a sustainable withdrawal rate that can withstand the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, right? And to answer your question specifically, if you need to lower your risk, you lower your risk. And it's a stock and bond question at that point, if you're taking a total return. Look, bonds within an investment portfolio are there to ballast the risk. Equity is where you absorb the return. The biggest mistakes we see with folks that are total return is they start trying to juice up the dividends. Over the long term, stocks and bonds have a correlation of like in the 30s, right? But during moments of market like craziness, there's a dislocation that takes place and that correlation breaks. and then stocks and bonds tend to move very high, in a similar manner. So all the diversification benefits got lost, except high credit quality bonds, right? Those are going to be yielding the less, but they kind of provide the ballast during those times. So if you're thinking from a stock equity standpoint and your total return, you obviously increase your allocation to fixed income bonds, right? That's it. High quality bonds. That's how you would play it. If it's time segmentation, you can do kind of two things, because I strongly feel that a rising glide path has a time segmentation quality to it, right? And so you can get an artificially lower allocation in equity than you normally would. Let's say if it's decided based on a plan that, look, when I retire, I think a 60-40 allocation is what I should be, and that's what the analysis show, funded ratio, Monte Carlo, et cetera, right? Once I've retired and I'm well into retirement, well, you're 1.5 years away. You're in that fragile decade. Why don't you begin with 45, 55 portfolio, 45 equity. I'm sorry, 55, 45 portfolio, 55 bonds, 45 equity. And then you just eke it up. Let's do 5 percentage points every year until you land on the 60-40. I think I said it the right way. Did I inverse the stock to bond?
Yeah, you want to get up to 60-40. So
yeah, I forgot how I said. But the point is, 40%. If you're naturally going to be 60-40 stock to bonds, then start 40-60. Yeah, I'm just saying that, and then creep your way up. That way during the fragile decade, you're kind of giving yourself that lower volatility in that portfolio to make sure that you can get in the right way. Another piece of time segmentation is start creating ladders, bond ladders, bucketing strategies, where you have your income covered for the first few years, right? And while you have that income covered, you can let the stock market run a little bit. The expectation is through time diversification that the stock returns are going to be able to replenish the buckets as they empty. But this is why I think it's very similar to a glide path, because if you look at your aggregate allocation, as soon as you get those cash buckets, think of that as a fixed income allocation, right? Kind of is, right? You're just not like earmarking. You're earmarking it more than just putting in a generalized allocation. So that's another way to go about doing it. The other piece, and I'll let you handle it, Wade, is building an income floor if you're income protection, or build in guardrails if you're if you're risk wrap. Wade, you want to chime in on those?
Yeah. So in those years preceding retirement, if you have income protection or risk wrap as a style, you want to assess whether you have an income gap. So after accounting for Social Security, any pensions, do you still have more essential spending that you'd like to have protected beyond those other income sources? So just if I have $40,000 of protected income, I'd like to have $50,000 protected. I've got a $10,000 gap. And with income protection or risk wrap, the way you may prefer to think about filling that gap is with some sort of protected lifetime income, which is available through commercial annuity products in the United States. Yeah.
Any questions?
There are a couple more that are still on the theme of investing while we're kind of going along here.
Knock them out.
So yeah, the next one, I want my investment fund's principal to grow at the rate of inflation and only spend the amount above the inflation return. Do you have any system or strategy to accomplish this?
Okay, where is that? Where are you seeing that, Wade?
I'm still in the live questions. This was asked at 1:21 p.m. from Ron.
Okay, I got you.
I can go ahead and, the basic.
All right, let me just start it off and I'll jump in just so I can read it.
Yeah, if you really were strict that you want your investments to grow at least the rate of inflation and only want to spend the amount that exceeds inflation, that's what TIPS do. Treasury inflation protected securities. If you're getting a 2% real yield plus inflation, that effectively means, without dipping into your principal at all, you could have a 2% distribution rate off of that. And then your nest egg will still grow at the rate of inflation. You're able to spend whatever the TIPS yield is, approximately 2%. And I should actually look up because I haven't in the last tips.
Yeah, and that would be like the Z-Bodhi approach, which is what Wade was saying earlier. The only thing is you don't see this a lot in practice simply because folks just don't have this amount of money on them to be able to cover their entirety of their expenses with just tips. You need to have that.
This question specifically that was looking. Oh, it's actually tips yields right now are over 2%, so around 2.15 to 2.2%. That would be the distribution rate you could support while still preserving your principal growing at the rate of inflation.
Do you want to, you probably do it eloquently than I am since you've probably explained it before. Do you want to give folks the mechanics on how tips work simply because it could be one of those things that we're just throwing terms around?
Yeah, so traditional bonds, you get interest rate, the yield, the coupon rate, and then the yield to maturity. The yield you get out of investing in bonds is not connected to inflation. Say it's 5%. You don't know what your real return will be. The real return is what return do you get above inflation. If you're getting a nominal 5% return and inflation is 1%, you've got a 4% real return. If inflation is 6%, you've got a negative 1% real return. You have a known nominal return. You don't know what the real return would be. In 1997, the US government introduced TIPS, Treasury Inflation Protected Securities, that quote a real rate of return, and then you don't know in advance what the nominal return will be because it's a real rate of return plus the inflation rate. So back to the scenario, if TIPS yields are 2% and inflation is 1%, I'll get 3% for the year. If inflation was 10%, I'll get 12% for the year. It's that real rate of return plus a variable inflation rate. And so that's why the way this question was worded, that's what tips are able to do. They're able to preserve the inflation adjusted value of your principal while kicking off right today. If you were to do this today, a yield of around 2.1 to 2.2% real.
Perfect. Wait, can you talk about how the stock market works and what it is?
An ownership stake in a company gives you a promise to receive future profits.
The derivative share of the profits. All right, we got one here. It's investment-y, so we'll knock it out. This is George. Thanks, George, for these questions, and these are great questions, by the way. I'm not just saying that.
No, I thought you were saying that to be nice, but now that you said it,
I'm not just saying that to be nice. I'm actually a nice guy naturally, so I say that all. No, they're good. They're engaging. So thanks, George. Hey, your views on dividends and capital gains reinvestments for a 74-year-old? Reinvest or take to offset RMDs?
Okay, so we're inside of your IRA at this point, and you're 74, so you are already paying RMDs. Your RMDs are due by December 31st of the calendar year, and they're based on the account balance at the end of the previous year, December 31st of the previous year, divided by an age-based factor, which is connected to your age at the end of the current calendar year. So that's the amount you're required to take out to cover your required minimum distributions. You might want to wait towards the end of the year to take that out. However, there's always the risk that if you pass away in December and you haven't taken your RMD yet, your family has the stress of not only managing everything going on, plus they have to get your RMD out or they're going to get penalized. Although the penalties used to be 50% and they're lower since Secure Act 2.0. Not the end of the world, but generally the point is you don't necessarily want to wait until the end of the year. And so therefore, just the mechanics of it, whenever there's a distribution, a dividend payout on the investments, rather than reinvesting that and then having to sell it again later in the year, you might think about it, okay, whenever there's a dividend payment, I'll take that out. That will help offset RMDs for the year. If all the dividends cover my RMD, great. I don't have to take anything else out. Otherwise, I'll take out the difference later in the year. Yeah, I think that's a fine behavioral, easy way to think about it. Let's just distribute dividends as part of the RMDs for the year. You don't strictly have to do that. You could just reinvest the dividend and then later on sell shares to take the RMD. Either approach works mechanically, But if you're comfortable with the idea of let's take out the dividends to cover RMDs, I think that's a perfectly acceptable approach to do that.
A quick aside here, and not the question, but it's more, you'd be surprised how many times this has come up when clients have transferred over and they thought this is how the game works. But RMDs, you can take out what you need for RMDs, pay the taxes, and you can kind of reinvest it. You know, some folks were like, "Oh, once they take a certain amount out for RMDs, they don't reinvest."
You invest in a taxable brokerage account.
Yeah. Like just one to grow on. It comes up. It's not like a frequent thing, but it comes up more often than not that folks are unaware that they can reinvest in a taxable thing. You just have to pay the taxes on it. Is all.
Yeah, the paying the taxes on it is the annoying part because it may require a bigger distribution than you want to spend. But right, it is important to emphasize you are allowed to reinvest.
Wait, it's happened more than 10 times in the last 10 years where someone just has cash and you ask them why so much. Oh, because I had to take it out. You know, that kind of thing. Oh, this is the question of the day.
Yeah.
I think you've been dreading it.
Yeah, I'm off the wagon on the.
What are we up to as number of push-ups being done in one day?
Yeah,
Wait, why don't you begin it?
I've been a naughty boy. I've not been doing push-ups or pull-ups. I need to get back on track with that.
You stopped? What happened?
I just one of those things.
No, I don't know. I don't know one of those things. What happened?
Bad enough.
Huh?
I didn't want it bad enough, so no excuse.
Your wife wasn't in comment. Hey, wait, can you pick up this toolbox for me? I can't open this jar of mayonnaise.
Learning to display feats of strength.
Well, Jeff, Wade is not alone, but my excuse is I think better. It's still an excuse. I had the knee surgery. I've talked about it. The partial knee surgery. And so I did it up until then, which was like 7 weeks ago, I think at this point. And I can't like plank at all. Although the last 2 weeks I've kicked it back up again, but I'm not starting at 100. I'm like at 75. I'll work it back up where I was, and I divide it by 4 and whatever it is, you know, kind of thing. You know, a little less than like 17 or whatever, and then I just top off. But we'll get there, man. We'll get there. All right. Push-ups, I think I maxed out at 8, 9 in a row. I got to work it again. Wade, are you committed to it?
Yeah,
yes or no? Yes or no, Wade? Yes or no?
At least later in the summer. I may have a gap here still. But
later in the summer. That's a no, everybody. That's a no, everyone. No, that's fine, man. So, Jeff, you went right. You like pierced us right in the heart. You went right for the jugular on that one. On the neck at that point.
We need accountability.
Yeah, we need an accountability partner. Can you email this to us every day?
He's asking me, and he's my accountability partner. And
who is?
Jeff, who asked the question.
Yeah, Jeff, we're counting on you now. All right. All right. So we talked about the glide path on my answer on the 1.5. There's a couple of those in this that could probably take us through the show here.
Yeah.
I'll start. I'll read row 4. Hi, Alex. You're awesome. Thank you for the show. No, it's
you guys are awesome, not just you.
Hi, yeah. Hi, Wade and Alex. You guys are awesome. Thank you for the show. I have a question about how to implement rising equity glide path and value-based equity glide path for someone who is 1 to 2 years from retirement, especially on the timing part. If my retirement asset allocation is 75% equity and 25% fixed income, what would be the expected allocation on day 1 of retirement? And the only caveat, Wade and I were looking at this one. We're going to assume by values-based, you mean like a value tilt versus like a growth tilt, as opposed to values-based investing, like socially responsible and all of that. I'm not 100% certain, but I think that's what you mean.
Yeah, I think that the term value-based asset allocation is not your moral values, but your
But usually because you hear value tilt when it's done like as a value stock, right? Not value based, but that's fine. That could be just an internal lexicon for us.
Yeah, and so to answer the question, so there's no, just like there's no answer, what should your asset allocation be? There's no answer on how far should you tilt away from your, in this case, strategic allocation of 75% equities. When Michael Kitces and I did that original research about this, our case study was you're generally comparing, you're going to be 60-40 eventually. That's 60% equity, 40% bonds. You dipped down to 30% equities at retirement, and then you work your way back up to 60% equities. But that wasn't any sort of optimized answer. That was just a case study example. There really is no optimized answer. If you want to go down 10%, 20%, 30%, you'd be looking at, if ultimately you want to be 75% equities, you may not necessarily ultimately go below 50% equities in that scenario. But the idea is figure out something to work your way down to before you work your way back up post-retirement. 50%, 45%, 65%. We really can't give you a precise answer, but it is a way to help manage that sequence of returns risk around the retirement date.
Yeah, I did mine when I went through the other question. Okay, here's another glide path one. Thanks for the show. I've learned a lot. I have a question regarding asset allocation across taxable, tax deferred, and tax exempt. Oh, I don't think this is glide path. Hang on. Give me 1 second.
It's not a glide path.
No, it's not what.
Where's the other glide path one? There was another glide path one somewhere on the list.
That included RSUs, I believe, right?
Oh, maybe that was it.
Yeah. Give me 1 second here.
Actually, there's a few more glide path adjacent questions, but I don't know if we want to hit all of those right now.
Like new ones?
For a future episode.
Okay, that's fine.
There's another.
I think that is pretty much the glide path done. I was wrong. We'll do asset location soon, but here's a one-off question. Maureen is listening live. Do index funds decline as an average of stocks in the index they follow? I don't quite understand.
Yeah. And yes, the decline or hopefully increase on average. But yes, you look at all the stocks held. Now, they're not just in equal proportions usually. It's the larger companies have a greater share of the index. But yes, the overall daily performance of the index fund would reflect the weighted average of the proportion of each stock in the index and its performance.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah, Maureen, there's a couple of, may expand upon that because there's a lot of stuff out there that you hear in the media and the like, and I just want to make sure you pick up on the nuances. I think people by default say index funds now for anything that's sort of passively managed, if you will, but there's many different flavors of this. And Wade alluded to it earlier. Yeah, they're going to decline as an average of the stocks in the index they follow. Or a couple of caveats. He had said, say it again, Wade, I'm sorry.
I mean, or increase. It's just the
yeah. Or increase. Yeah. Let's be an optimist. Half full.
Average, they don't decline.
Yeah. And so what Wade is, when Wade said equal weighted or market cap weighted. So S&P 500, right? This is where the top stocks have a disproportionate, they have a disproportionate weighting in the index relative to the smaller stocks. Because if Facebook that's worth $1 trillion versus another company that's worth $80 billion, if they go down 1 percentage point each, it's not gonna have the same impact. The smaller one is not gonna have the same impact in the total decline for that day. It's market cap weighted. Now, what you do see a lot, and it's been being pitched as this sort of great discovery, are these equal weighted index, because they'll come back and say, hey, look, we don't want Meta, we don't want Alphabet to have this disproportionate influence on the index. We want to just get the average, treat everyone the same. Treat everyone
as
as
Dow Jones works.
Well, that was price weighted. It's a slight it's a slight variation. Aha. No. That's Dow Jones is completely idiotic the way that one's done. But that's for another day. If you're ever listening to the news, just ignore the Dow Jones. But it's true, right? And no one uses that professionally. So then, going back to the equal weighted index, what's happening is every stock has the same influence on the index going up or down. That's not necessarily a good thing. What you're doing there implicitly is you're taking size bets. You're taking small size bets, and you're taking value bets. Unknowingly. Yes, they may perform better, but it's not because of the equal weighting. What's happening is you're just getting exposure to value and size, which have greater premiums in the market over time. You're just doing it in a very messy way. You're doing it in a way that internal fund that's equal weighted is going to be full of transaction costs that you never want. And at the end of the day, you have to sort stocks on something. It wouldn't make sense for you to sort stocks in an index just based on the alphabet. Well, that's kind of what you're doing when you're equally weighting things. Price does matter in things. And so the market cap index is the way to go. If you want value exposure and size exposure, buy those indices. But I would avoid these equal weighted indices. I think that's more of a market. Not I think that's just a marketing gimmick to sort of sell something. And you see that all the time on CNBC where they're shilling those things, and it shouldn't be done. And I don't know if they know better, but it just shouldn't be done from that standpoint. But to answer your question, yes, a market cap weighted index, yes, it will follow the average just based on their weightings, whether they go up or down.
And more broadly, that's true for any mutual fund.
Yeah.
The mutual fund's daily performance is based on the actual performance of all its underlying holdings, averaged together to get the overall amount of assets and then the overall growth or decline for the day across them all.
So there it is. Wait, how many papers have you published, more or less?
I just had to count this up for a CE thing. It was 66 peer-reviewed.
Okay. So on average, Wade and I have published 30 articles each.
There you go.
Right? Doesn't make any sense, right? Well, that's your equal weighted index. How's that one? Is that a good example?
That's about the average depth of the river is 2 inches, but you can still drown because there's a hole.
Yeah. Never cross a river that's on average 3 feet deep. That's an old stats thing. All right. So let's talk about the tax location here. We got a couple of those questions. Let me start it off by reading it. I'll listen to you, and then let's see what can be added to it. Hi, Alex and Wade. Thanks for the show. I've learned a lot. I have a question regarding asset allocation across taxable, tax-deferred, and tax-exempt accounts. Taxable being, the normal accounts that you would do on an after-tax basis, like individual accounts. Tax-deferred, those are like IRAs and 401ks, 403b, those kind of things. Tax-exempt, Roth IRA, right? So I plan to live off my taxable account for 12 years after retirement. So they're going to tap into that first, it seems. The asset allocation that I have in mind for the taxable account is 70-30 equity to T-bills, using a rising equity glide path or value-based glide path approach. Is this a good plan? For the tax-deferred and tax-exempt accounts, can I have a more aggressive asset allocation like 100% equity? My RISA score, my RISA profile is total return, and I only use low-cost indexing mutual funds and indexing funds. Take it away, boss.
Yeah, so this question, right, you got to make some compromises in real life. So let me quickly mention the general asset location guidelines, but then talk about how that gets complicated when you then overlay distributions in retirement. So the general guidance about asset location is In your taxable account, you want tax efficient assets. So that's generally, stocks are more tax efficient than bonds because part of their returns are the long-term capital gains. And then you only have to pay when you sell, you only have to pay on the gains when you sell them. Bonds are tax inefficient because everything comes out as ordinary income, interest payments. No, I guess not everything. If there could have capital gains, but usually it's a big chunk of that is interest income, which is ordinary income taxed on an annual basis. So the guideline is you put your bonds or your other tax inefficient asset classes in the tax deferred account. You put your stock index funds that are the most tax efficient in the taxable brokerage account. And then for the Roth, this is going to also be more growth oriented assets. If you have less tax efficient growth oriented assets, like if you have an emerging market index fund or if you have a small cap value index fund where the long-term expected growth rate is higher, but they are less tax efficient, that sort of thing can go in the Roth. And again, the bonds and the tax deferred, and then the tax efficient stock index funds in the taxable brokerage account. That's the general guidelines. Now that gets, the complication is then if you're following a conventional wisdom withdrawal ordering sequence, and or even if you're doing tax efficient Roth conversions and things, it's going to have the same problem. You spend your taxable account first, and you're doing, while the taxable account remains, you're doing Roth conversions as well, but you spend on the taxable account first. If you have a lot of stock index funds in your taxable account and your tax deferred account is filled with bonds, that might give you a declining equity glide path as you go in through those early retirement years. And that's not really what you want to do. So you have to create some sort of compromise. And that's what this question's ultimately getting at, is trying to strike some sort of compromise there, putting T-bills into the taxable brokerage account, maybe because they have a lower interest payment, so they are relatively more tax efficient than other kinds of bonds. And as a way to then, when I do this withdrawal order sequencing, I'm also selling some bond or some T-bills in this case to pay expenses in those early retirement years. And that's more my cash bucket in my brokerage account because I'm going to spend it in those early retirement years. So of course, I can't fully assess the whole case study in terms of if this is the best approach for the individual to take, but at least it does touch on trying to find a reasonable compromise between asset location and the reality of withdrawal order sequencing overlaid on top of the asset location.
All right. Let me see if there's another one that was interested, or let me take on this question, and then we can continue with the one below. Give me 1 second, Wade. I'm just trying to organize for those listening in. I'm just trying to make sure we're curating this properly. Give me 1 second. All right. So that one's for the glide path. Anyone similar ilk? Questions that we have there?
Well, there's more tax efficiency questions. There's more glide path questions. I guess we can.
Okay, this looks like a one-off one. Hi, Alex and Wade. My financial advisor recommended that I convert my Vanguard Growth Indexing Mutual Fund to its equivalent ETF for better tax efficiency. The conversion doesn't incur capital gains or losses. But after comparing the fees, the mutual fund is 1 basis point higher than the ETF and yearly dividend distributions. Mutual fund is one, blah, 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 blah. I don't see a big benefit for doing this. Is there any real benefit for doing it? Thank you. I don't know. If I'm being completely, in candid, all I am, right, is candid here. I don't like the Vanguard Growth Index Fund, or I naturally don't like large growth as an asset class. There's no necessarily long-term premium for investing in growth stocks. You pay for that privilege through lower returns. Now, you could have areas, the four horsemen, you could have time periods that are sustainable where they've outperformed, but strategically, that's not an asset class that I like very much. I think advisors or individuals do that simply because, hey, let's cover all our bases. But if you look at, long-term returns and sources of return from the stock market, the growth asset class isn't one of them. If you're going to do that, you might as well put it in like the S&P or some sort of total market. So at that I have trouble. So again, I'm not a big fan of that to begin with. The fact that your advisor doesn't know that is probably more of a concern for me, whether it's go to the Grand Vanguard Growth or the equivalent ETF. Now, I would also ask if I have a client and the client is saying, hey, I don't know if this is nitpicky or not, to be honest with you, and I'm trying to be respectful, but you may not be ready for an advisor, frankly, if you're looking at it and thinking, oh, this is 1 basis point higher and I don't want to do that and this and that. That would be a headache for me as an advisor, not because I don't want the client asking questions, but it just strikes me as I like, is this person going to like be like this all the time? And that's a hassle for me, as opposed to from a big picture standpoint. Just the fact that you have a growth index fund would be enough for me to say, look, we don't need that. Let's go elsewhere. Does it matter switching? Probably not. Would be my point. But my larger question is, why have that to begin with? Wait.
Yeah, this may be a collaborator, but you seem to answer a lot of the side questions.
Sorry. Yeah, but they're collaborating about the wrong thing.
Or they weren't. Or you were answering things that were not asked. No one cared what your opinion was on.
Okay, all right, fair enough. That's fair.
Point was, did you convert your mutual funds to their equivalent ETFs for better tax efficiency? The fee part, there's only a 1 basis point difference. I think, it's generally not a big deal either way. I tend to just go with whatever is available. But I guess if I have a choice between ETFs and mutual funds, I do pick the ETF options. I don't know if there's any real strong reason.
ETFs tend to be more tax efficient, but maybe this Vanguard fund in particular has some quirk that makes it uber tax efficient that I don't know about offhand. Sometimes you see that with DFA where it's almost equivalent as the ETF. But you can make the case, the trading, daily trading, maybe, money needs to be extremely liquid. ETF could be a little better. It's one of those things that it's not a problem until it is. But I'm not too familiar with the mechanics.
If you have any sort of behavioral biases that lead you to watch the price as it fluctuates during the day and that sort of thing, mutual funds can be the better protection because they're only priced a couple hours after the market closes and you can't track their movements during the day. So you just waste less time and effort. But if you ignore the daily fluctuations anyway, then that's not an issue. Okay.
But you're right. No one asked me my opinion on the growth. I found an opening, Wade. I found an opening. I made my own. All right. Let's see here.
You may have asked a question, but I'm going to answer a completely different
Let me tell you what I think. All right, why don't I do this one? Since this is an interesting one, and it takes us off the glide path and all of that. You want to do that tax planning one about the software?
Yeah, we could do that one.
Because it's a one-off, and that could be a 10-minute answer. If you give it its proper treatment. So I'm counting on you, Wade, to see if we can take us home here. In April 2023, very precise, our readers, T. Rowe Price acquired Retiree Inc., a firm led by William Meyer and William Reichenstein that offered innovative retirement planning software to create smart withdrawal strategies for retirement. Are there any comparable withdrawal strategy software packages that are available to individual retirees for purchase without being a client of T. Rowe Price or another investment advisor? I laughed when I read this, not because of the question. The question is a great question. It's a good question. But Wade and one of the Williams, to be named later, have had back and forths on tax philosophies, right, Wade?
No, it wasn't even that. No, I agree with them on the tax philosophies. It was more.
He caught you on something that he wasn't right on. I forget.
Yeah, everyone's just calls it tax bracket management, but even though that's not what we're talking about, because we're talking about Social Security and Medicare surcharges, but he was just hammering, oh, they call it tax bracket management. That means they don't know what they're talking about. That sort of, it's a kind of a non-issue that became an issue. But yeah, we'll not answer different questions. So are there any comparable withdrawal strategy softwares available to individuals who are not working with an advisor? And I recently started doing a deeper dive into different software. So one thing that Covisum, that's Joel Sasser at Covisum, he developed tax planning software for advisors. That's kind of the caveat here. You can't really get it direct as a consumer unless you're willing to pay for the advisor license, which may not be cost efficient. But it does a great job with the tax planning. So any advisor using that can be a great resource. I started looking into some of the consumer-facing tools and was a little bit surprised that at least the tools I looked at did not approach this sort of philosophy of tax planning in a very effective manner. Now, the one I haven't dug deep into is Maxify, so I know that's popular with folks. I don't know Maxify. I would hope Maxify does it right, but I did not have experience with, if you name what are the other planning softwares that consumers like to use, I was not impressed by how they do their Roth conversions. The problem is, so you've got the conventional wisdom, which is you spend taxable, then tax deferred, then tax exempt. And then the question is, should you do Roth conversions on top of that? And two of the softwares I looked at, they just overlaid the Roth conversions on top of the conventional wisdom, which made Roth conversions really inefficient because it just sped up the process of having only a Roth account left. And it's really tax inefficient to have only a Roth account if you don't have other taxable income sources, because you don't even get to take advantage of your standard deduction. So these other software programs, they didn't really recommend doing Roth conversions because you got no benefit out of it. What software has to do this correctly is not managing some sort of tax rate just to determine if you should do a Roth conversion. But then once your taxable account is depleted, it also has to continue to manage that tax rate to decide how much comes out of your IRA in excess of RMDs. And then the rest of the spending comes from the Roth. And that's where I have not, to answer the specific question, is there consumer-facing software that will do this right? I have not seen it. Maxify may be an exception, but otherwise, the main packages you can name, I was not impressed with this. They did not blend the distributions from the tax deferred and the tax exempt accounts after the taxable account was depleted. And that leads them to make really uninformed type of answers about how you should do a Roth conversion strategy. So unfortunately, the answer to this question is no, there's not really any comparable software packages available to individuals without being a client of a planning firm.
Yeah, now you could ask, what about this one? What about that one? And we've looked at Wade has looked at the top ones. I know he has. We don't want to go into it because we know them as well. And
by name, but
yeah, we don't want to get into
that. I have not looked at, but the other ones you might name, I probably have looked at. Yeah,
and the other piece, just because the question you could be thinking is, why is that? And then it just becomes just a practical issue. Look, it probably costs to create a software in earnest with the securities and this and that and everything that's needed. You know, you're looking at multiple millions of dollars, even though there's no code environment and all that kind of stuff. Look, the reality is it's going to cost you into the millions. And there's just, believe it or not, there's not a lot of market for do-it-yourselfers with this particular question. There's just not enough to justify that cost if they're doing that. That's why there's a lot of like Monte Carlo things that consumers can use, and that's easier to do. But these cost more money, and they can't recoup their costs in a manner that will merit the investment into it. That's why they usually go right to advisors for this, because there is a market for advisors for this that will make it quick. Because if you create a software like this for consumers, the Q&As and the help desk will just be, the support will be out of control. And so you just don't see it for that very reason. Now, again, this is where the person asking this question, you may be better off just going to an advisor and doing a one-time financial plan that's specific to this, and relative to the cost and the advice that they're providing, from a tax perspective, if it's going to set you the right way to withdraw efficiently and manage your taxes, it's probably going to be well worth the cost as a one-time endeavor, as opposed to trying to recreate an Excel, risk getting it wrong and the like, and spending 300 hours, 400 hours when you really get down to it on creating it. You don't see it in consumers. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon because of the investment needed to build it and to support it. And so you're probably better off just looking at a one-time tax plan from an advisory firm. Honestly, and I'm trying to pitch anyone. I just think that's just probably the cheapest way to do it. Wait.
Yeah, it's hard to provide this really detailed tax planning software directly to the end consumer. So at some point, hopefully we'll see new developments, but right now it's kind of unfortunate that there is no good answer to provide here.
Yeah.
And on that dour note.
Well, let me see. Do we have a quick one? Let me see here. You want to knock out that HSA one about 20 employees?
Okay.
And we'll end on that one, so it's on an up note.
Yeah, there you go. All right.
All right.
Okay. If you work for an employer with greater than 20 employees, can you wait to apply for Medicare after age 65 so you can keep contributing to your HSA account? And well, double check with your HR department. But yeah, generally that's the 20 employee, actively employed, you or your spouse actively employed at a firm with at least 20 employees. That health coverage from that employment, it's not just I'm employed at firm A, but I still have a health plan through firm B. That doesn't work. You're getting your health insurance through this employer. They have more than 20 employees. Double check with HR, but generally speaking, the answer is yes. You do not have to apply for Medicare when you reach age 65. That employer plan can remain as primary coverage. Now, the quirk on this is as soon as you sign up for Medicare, you can't contribute to the HSA anymore. And it's even retroactive. You can sign up for the previous 6 months. So if I'm already past age 60, now not pre-age 65, but if I'm 65 in 6 months and I sign up for Medicare, my Medicare will be active since I turned 65 for those previous 6 months. I cannot make any contribution to an HSA once I'm in Medicare. And Part A for most Americans, if you're going to get a Social Security benefit, you don't have to pay any premiums for Part A for the hospital insurance. So a lot of times, even if you are actively employed and have employer-based coverage, you still want to sign up for Medicare Part A just because it's a backstop, could provide some additional benefits with a hospital stay and so forth. The downside, though, is just you can't contribute to an HSA at that point. So you have to be careful to make clear you do not want to sign up for Medicare Part A or Part B because you want to continue to contribute to an HSA, and then you should stop making contributions to the HSA once you're within 6 months subsequently of signing up for Medicare.
And that's a wrap, everybody. Thank you so much. Wade and I are going to hit the push-ups and pull-ups and see and make sure we can answer this with our head held up high next time. And we expect you to, who's our accountability partner again?
Jeff,
you got to come strong and keep us honest. And you have one here on Right Capital. Yeah, we like Right Capital. This is for the extent we don't get into it too much, but yeah, we use it internally as well at McLean Asset Management. We like it, as a general matter.
Though they may also bear the issue of not really getting this tax planning part.
Yeah, I have no idea if they're consumer facing, so I don't want
No,
to.
they're not consumer facing, but they don't blend the tax deferred and tax exempt distributions.
Well,
like they should.
truthfully, we have it to the degree that we use that for goals-based planning, but you have to understand, as advisors, and you may be one, I don't know off the top of my head, but these all-in-one solutions generally fall short of the mark, so you end up using specialized programs for specialized answers.
Yeah,
that's the bottom line.
Right.
You know?
COVISM software is not that comprehensive planning software. It's specifically a tool to do the tax planning. And that's right. Any generalized tool may not really get the precise answer you're looking for. So you do have to tap into other tools as well.
Yeah, and I should have said this earlier. This is because we're new at this game. If you're there's about 25 people on. If you're still on, or maybe you left the room, but smash that like button. Or subscribe.
Hit like and subscribe to our
hit like and subscribe if you don't mind. It's good for us. We should have said it at the beginning. Way, damn, we're terrible. But thank you everyone for listening. It's much appreciated, and we'll catch you in the next Q&A session. And remember, Retire with Style. Every Tuesday we release it.
That's right. Thanks everyone.
Take care.
And don't leave, Alex.